El Escorial, September 1598. The corridors of the somber palace lie in silence, broken only by the whispers of physicians and the occasional moan emanating from the royal chamber. Inside the room, upon a deteriorating bed, a man lies in agony. His once powerful body is now ravaged by pain. His hands, deformed by gout, resemble useless claws. His legs, swollen with edema, have not supported him for weeks. The putrid odor that emanates from his decomposing tissues is so intense that even the most dedicated servants cover their noses when entering the chamber. This man is not some common criminal paying for his sins, nor a commoner without access to medical care. He is Philip II, the most powerful monarch of his time, lord of an empire where the sun never sets, king of Spain, Portugal, Naples, Sicily, Duke of Milan, and master of the vast territories of the New World. The man who challenged Elizabeth I of England, who built the magnificent Escorial, who led the fight against the Protestant Reformation, now succumbs to a slow and excruciating death, abandoned by his own body. How did the most powerful king in the world come to this tragic and repugnant end? To understand the horror of Philip II's final days, we must travel back in time and meet the man behind the crown. Born on May 21, 1527, in Valladolid, Philip was the son of Emperor Charles V and the Portuguese Princess Isabella. From an early age, he was groomed to govern the vast empire his father had built. Unlike Charles, who was a warrior by nature, Philip proved to be a meticulous bureaucrat, an administrator obsessed with details. He was known as El Rey de los Papeles, the King of Papers. Such was his dedication to documents and writing. He spent hours in his study, meticulously noting every aspect of his empire's governance. When Charles V abdicated in 1556, Philip inherited the Spanish throne and much of the empire. In 1580, amid the Portuguese succession crisis following King Sebastian's disappearance at the Battle of Alcácer Quibir, Philip claimed his right to the Portuguese throne as the grandson of Manuel I. With an army led by the Duke of Alba, he defeated the forces of Dom Antonio, Prior of Crato, and was crowned Philip I of Portugal, uniting the two greatest world powers under his crown. The king was a complex man. Deeply religious and a fervent defender of Catholicism, he considered himself God's armed hand on earth. Under his command, the Spanish Inquisition reached its peak, persecuting heretics and infidels. At the same time, he was a patron of the arts, a refined collector, and a visionary builder. His greatest architectural legacy, the monastery of San Lorenzo de El Escorial, combined palace, monastery, and mausoleum, a perfect symbolism for a king who saw his power as an extension of divine will. In his personal life, Philip married 4 times. His first wife, Maria Manuela of Portugal, died giving birth to Prince Carlos, who would later be imprisoned by his own father for insubordination, dying under mysterious circumstances. His second wife, Mary Tudor of England, known as Bloody Mary, also died without giving him heirs. The third, Elizabeth of Valois, gave him 2 daughters before dying in childbirth. The fourth and last, Anna of Austria, who was his niece, finally gave him his long-desired heir, the future Philip III, along with other children, although only 5 survived infancy. Despite the almost absolute power he wielded, Philip II was never a healthy man. From his youth, he suffered from recurrent attacks of gout, a painful disease caused by excess uric acid in the blood, which forms crystals in the joints, causing intense inflammation. Gout was known as the disease of kings, as it primarily afflicted the wealthy who indulged in diets rich in red meat and wine, exactly Philip's case. As the years passed, his gout attacks became more frequent and severe. In 1590, at the age of 63, the king's health began to deteriorate significantly. Besides chronic gout, he began to suffer from tertian fevers, fever spikes every 3 days, a typical symptom of malaria. He also developed severe edema, an accumulation of fluid that swelled his legs to the point of making them unrecognizable. The combination of these diseases gradually immobilized him. He, who had once been called the prudent king, was now a prisoner of his own body. The last 2 years of his life were a true Calvary. Around 1596, Philip could barely write. His gout-deformed hands could hardly hold a pen. Ironically, for a man who had built his identity as an administrator and bureaucrat, this represented a devastating loss. His body, which had never been particularly robust, began to fail. The king who controlled half the world now barely controlled his most basic bodily functions. In July 1598, Philip's condition worsened dramatically. The edema had spread throughout his body, causing excruciating pain. Gout attacked not only his hands and feet, but also his knees, elbows, and even his spine. The royal physicians, powerless in the face of such suffering, resorted to bloodletting and purges that only weakened the monarch further. The fever did not subside, and Philip alternated between delirium and moments of agonizing lucidity. It was during this period that his situation reached the height of horror. Permanently confined to bed, the king developed deep bed sores that quickly became infected. The open wounds on his back, buttocks, and legs became breeding grounds for infection, attracting insects and creating an environment conducive to the proliferation of parasites. Reports indicate that his mattress had to be perforated to allow the king's bodily fluids to drain without him having to move, which would have been impossible due to the excruciating pain. As if this were not enough, the monarch's weakened and immobile body became host to a massive infestation of lice. The king himself, in one of his last moments of lucidity, is said to have commented with bitter irony, "See how this body that commanded half the world now cannot even command its own parasites." The closest courtiers witnessed how the great Philip II was literally being devoured alive, unable to defend himself even against the smallest creatures. The horror of this situation was not merely physical. For a deeply religious man like Philip, the degradation of his body also represented a spiritual trial. Several accounts indicate that, in his moments of lucidity, the king viewed his suffering as an anticipated purgatory, an expiation of his sins even before death. One of the clerics who attended him in his final days wrote that His Majesty endured the pain with such patience and Christian devotion that he seemed more like a saint under trial than a dying monarch. At dawn on September 13, 1598, after 52 days of uninterrupted agony, Philip II finally met his end. His last moments were a mixture of feverish delirium and extreme religious devotion. With a crucifix clutched in his deformed hands, he murmured his final words, a prayer or perhaps a plea for forgiveness. No one knows for certain. What is known is that when death finally took him, his face, transfigured by pain, seemed to relax, as if finding at last the relief that the medicine of his time could not provide. The king's body, that tortured shell that once housed one of Europe's most powerful minds, was quickly prepared for burial. The embalmers worked with difficulty, trying to give dignity to what had become, in the last weeks, something almost inhuman. The corpse was then taken to the royal crypt of the Escorial Monastery, that same majestic building that Philip had ordered built as a symbol of his power and faith. The death of Philip II closes a fascinating and contradictory chapter in European history. The king who dedicated his life to expanding and preserving Catholicism who sent the Spanish Armada against England, who suppressed revolts in the Netherlands, who unified Portugal and Spain, ended his days in a state of degradation that shocked even his most fervent admirers. There is a powerful lesson in how Philip II's end contrasts with his life. During his reign, he tried to control everything: politics, religion, culture, the seas, distant territories. He built a bureaucratic system so detailed that nothing escaped his knowledge. And yet, in the end, he could not control even the most basic functions of his own body. The man who considered himself God's instrument on earth became a vivid example of human fragility. Historians today debate the extent to which Philip's prolonged illness affected political decisions in the final years of his reign. Some argue that his debilitated state of health forced him to rely more on advisors, many of whom lacked his strategic vision, thus contributing to the military and economic setbacks that Spain began to suffer. Others suggest that the experience of physical suffering may have tempered his obstinacy and made him more inclined to seek peace, as seen in some treaties signed in the final years of his reign. What is not debated is the symbolic impact of Philip II's death. For an era in which the king's body represented the body of the state, seeing the most powerful monarch of Christendom reduced to an invalid devoured by parasites was a profound blow to the period's perceptions of power and divinity. If the king, anointed by God, could suffer in such a terrible and humiliating way, what did this say about the divine order that supposedly governed the world? Philip's son, who would become Philip III of Spain, Philip II of Portugal, inherited an empire still vast, but already showing the first signs of the long decline that would mark the following century. Unlike his father, he was not a meticulous administrator, delegating much of the government to favorites like the Duke of Lerma. Perhaps horrified by the end he had witnessed, the new king seemed more interested in enjoying life's pleasures than in consuming himself in the bureaucratic work that had slowly killed his father. The death of Philip II reminds us that, in the end, not even the most powerful monarchs escape the human condition. The king who ruled an empire where the sun never set experienced a long, painful, and degrading personal sunset. His horrific end remains a memento mori, a reminder of mortality that sooner or later makes us all equal, whether kings or beggars. The story of the powerful monarch who died in agony, slowly consumed by disease and parasites, is more than a macabre tale to satisfy morbid curiosities. It is a vivid reminder that behind crowns, scepters, and royal mantles exist fragile and fallible human beings, and that, however great earthly power may be, there are limits that no royal decree can overcome.